Imagine walking into a room full of people and feeling an invisible wall slam shut around you. Not because you're different in any obvious way, not because you're dressed strangely, speaking a foreign language, or carrying yourself with arrogance. No, the wall appears for a far more unsettling reason. You think too deeply. You see patterns others miss, question assumptions they take for granted, and pursue truths they'd rather avoid. And somehow, without saying a word, your very presence makes them uncomfortable. This isn't paranoia. It's a phenomenon as old as civilization itself, yet so poorly understood that most people dismiss it as social awkwardness or intellectual arrogance. The reality is far more disturbing. Intelligence, particularly the kind that seeks truth over comfort, triggers something primal in human psychology, something that turns admiration into fear, curiosity into hostility, and respect into rejection. Consider this paradox. We live in a society that claims to value intelligence above almost everything else. We celebrate scientific breakthroughs, applaud innovation, and build monuments to great thinkers. Yet, when you encounter someone genuinely intelligent, not just educated or successful, but someone who thinks with genuine depth and originality, why does the atmosphere shift? Why do conversations become strained? Why do people suddenly find excuses to leave, change the subject, or worse, actively work to undermine that person? The answer reveals something terrifying about human nature itself. Unlike other forms of superiority, physical strength, wealth, beauty, intelligence operates on a different plane entirely. When you meet someone physically stronger, you might feel impressed or motivated. When you encounter someone wealthier, you might feel envious but inspired. These qualities are external. They don't challenge your fundamental sense of who you are. But intelligence? Intelligence reflects back your own limitations in ways that cut straight to the core of your identity. Think about the last time you were in a conversation with someone whose mind operated on a level you couldn't quite reach. Not someone showing off or trying to impress, but someone naturally thinking several layers deeper than everyone else. Do you remember that moment when you realized they were seeing connections, implications, and possibilities that simply weren't occurring to you? That wasn't just intellectual inadequacy you felt. It was something far more primitive. Something that made you want to either flee or attack. This is what psychologists call the mirror effect. But it goes deeper than any academic term can capture. Deep thinkers don't just present new ideas. They inadvertently expose the shallow foundations upon which most people build their entire sense of self. They reveal, without meaning to, that the assumptions, beliefs, and worldviews that others cling to might be nothing more than comfortable illusions. And human beings, it turns out, will do almost anything to protect their illusions. If this resonates with you, if you've ever felt that invisible wall of rejection for thinking too deeply, then you need to understand what's really happening here. Hit that subscribe button now, because what we're about to uncover will fundamentally change how you see every social interaction for the rest of your life. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of history's most brutally honest philosophers, understood this better than almost anyone. He recognized that intelligence isn't just a gift. It's a curse that isolates those who possess it from the very society they might hope to enlighten. But why? What is it about the thinking mind that poses such a threat to the collective unconscious? The answer lies buried in forces so fundamental to human psychology that they operate below the level of conscious awareness, shaping every interaction, every relationship, every moment of acceptance or rejection you'll ever experience. And once you see these forces for what they truly are, you'll never look at human social dynamics the same way again. The roots of this phenomenon stretch back to the very foundations of human consciousness itself. What you're witnessing when intelligence meets social rejection isn't a modern problem. It's an ancient survival mechanism gone catastrophically wrong in the modern world. Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist who mapped the depths of human consciousness, identified what he called the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of primitive instincts and archetypal patterns that govern human behavior below the threshold of awareness. Within this collective unconscious lies a force so powerful that it can turn entire societies against their brightest minds, the desperate need for psychological safety. You see, For most of human history, survival depended not on being the smartest person in the tribe, but on being accepted by the tribe. Our ancestors lived in small groups where social harmony literally meant the difference between life and death. Being cast out meant facing the wilderness alone, a death sentence. This is why your brain is hardwired with an alarm system that goes off whenever it senses potential social rejection. But here's where it gets sinister. Intelligence, particularly the kind that questions established truths, triggers this ancient alarm system in others. When someone thinks more deeply than the group norm, they're not just presenting new information, they're threatening the very foundations of group cohesion. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this with brutal clarity. He observed that most people don't seek truth. They seek comfort. They don't want their assumptions challenged. They want their assumptions confirmed. This is what he meant when he distinguished between the will to live, the blind drive for survival and pleasure that governs most human behavior, and the will to truth, the rarer, more dangerous pursuit of understanding reality, regardless of how uncomfortable that reality might be. Think about what happens when someone with genuine intelligence enters a social situation. They don't just bring their ideas, they bring a different way of processing reality entirely. Where others see simple cause and effect, they see complex systems. Where others accept surface explanations, they probe for deeper meanings. Where others find comfort in familiar patterns, they notice inconsistencies and contradictions. This creates what Friedrich Nietzsche called the herd mentality versus the free spirit dynamic. The herd, which includes most of society, operates on shared assumptions, collective beliefs, and unquestioned traditions. These shared frameworks create a sense of safety and belonging. But when a free spirit appears, someone whose mind operates independently of these collective frameworks, they become a walking reminder that the herd's cherished beliefs might be wrong. And nothing terrifies the human psyche more than the possibility that its foundational beliefs are illusions. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and studied human behavior under extreme conditions, observed something profound. People can endure almost any suffering as long as they can find meaning in it. But take away their meaning-making frameworks, show them that their purposes, their beliefs, their reasons for living might be arbitrary constructions, and they collapse psychologically. This is exactly what deep thinkers do, often without realizing it. They don't just challenge ideas, they challenge the entire meaning-making apparatus that others use to make sense of their lives. When someone questions the assumptions underlying your career, your relationships, your goals, your values, they're not just disagreeing with you, they're threatening your psychological survival. Jean-Paul Sartre captured this phenomenon in his concept of bad faith, the way humans desperately avoid confronting the full weight of their freedom and responsibility by pretending that their choices are determined by external forces. Most people live in bad faith because it's psychologically easier than accepting that they are radically free to choose their own values and create their own meaning. But intelligent people, by their very nature, tend to live in what Sartre called authentic existence. They refuse to accept predetermined answers and insist on thinking for themselves. Their authenticity becomes a mirror that reflects others' bad faith back to them, and the result is profound discomfort, resentment, and ultimately, rejection. The cruel irony is that society needs these deep thinkers. Every advance in science, philosophy, art, and human understanding has come from individuals willing to think beyond the accepted boundaries. Yet society consistently punishes them for this very gift, creating a perpetual cycle where progress comes not because of social support, but in spite of social resistance. What's happening in our digital age represents the most sophisticated suppression of intelligence in human history, and most people don't even realize they're participating in it. Consider this disturbing reality. We live in an era with unprecedented access to information, yet critical thinking has never been more rare. We have the tools to engage with complex ideas, yet our attention spans have never been shorter. We claim to value intellectual discourse, yet our most influential platforms reward the exact opposite. This isn't an accident. It's the inevitable result of cognitive biases that have been weaponized by systems designed to exploit them. The first casualty is what psychologists call cognitive ease, your brain's preference for simple, familiar information over complex, challenging ideas. This isn't just a minor quirk of human psychology. It's a fundamental flaw that shapes every decision you make about what to read, watch, believe, and share. Your brain literally experiences complex thinking as pain, while it experiences familiar, simplified content as pleasure. Now imagine this biological weakness amplified by algorithms specifically designed to give you more of what feels good and less of what requires effort. Social media platforms don't just reflect your preferences, they actively reshape them, training your brain to crave intellectual junk food while developing an aversion to nutritious ideas. The result? A generation that confuses information with wisdom, confuses having opinions with thinking deeply, and confuses being entertained with being educated. But the consequences go far deeper than individual ignorance. They're rewiring the very fabric of how we determine truth in society. Take the phenomenon of viral thinking, the way ideas spread not because they're accurate or valuable, but because they trigger emotional responses that compel people to share them. Nuanced, thoughtful analysis doesn't go viral. Outrage does. Oversimplification does. Confirmation bias does. This creates a perverse incentive structure where the people who think most deeply are systematically excluded from public discourse, while those who think most shallowly dominate it. You see this playing out in every sphere of human activity. In politics, candidates who offer complex solutions to complex problems lose to those who offer simple slogans. In media, thoughtful journalism loses to sensationalism. In education, teachers who challenge students to think critically are replaced by those who help them feel good about themselves. In business, visionaries who see long-term possibilities are sidelined by those who deliver short-term profits. The neurological research on this phenomenon is startling. Brain scans show that when people feel intellectually inferior, their amygdala, the fear center, becomes hyperactive, while their prefrontal cortex, the reasoning center, becomes suppressed. In other words, encountering superior intelligence literally shuts down people's ability to think clearly, replacing rational thought with primal fear responses. This creates a feedback loop of intellectual degradation. As deep thinkers withdraw from public discourse to avoid triggering these fear responses, society loses access to their insights. As society becomes more intellectually homogeneous, it becomes even less tolerant of genuine intelligence. As genuine intelligence becomes rarer in public spaces, people become even more threatened when they encounter it. The end result is a society that has created what amounts to an intellectual immune system, a mechanism that automatically identifies and rejects ideas that are too complex, too challenging, or too far ahead of their time. Like a biological immune system that attacks healthy tissue, this intellectual immune system attacks the very thoughts and thinkers that could solve society's most pressing problems. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. Most people experience this intellectual suppression as freedom. They feel liberated from the burden of deep thought. They find relief in simple answers. They experience comfort in intellectual conformity. They don't realize they've been systematically trained to fear the one thing that could actually set them free, the courage to think for themselves. And they certainly don't realize that this training has created a world where truth seekers are treated as enemies, where wisdom is seen as a threat, and where the brightest minds are driven into isolation not by accident, but by design. The greatest act of rebellion in our time isn't political, it's intellectual. It's the decision to think deeply in a world that profits from your mental shallowness. And once you understand how to navigate this reality, you don't just survive the rejection, you transcend it entirely. Here's the first radical shift you must make. Stop trying to make everyone understand you. This isn't giving up, it's strategic intelligence. Schopenhauer himself recognized this when he wrote that a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. The deep thinker's mistake isn't thinking too deeply. It's expecting shallow minds to appreciate depth. Consider how history's greatest intellectuals actually operated. They didn't waste their energy trying to convince the masses. Instead, they created what we might call intellectual sanctuaries, spaces where deep thinking could flourish without interference from those who couldn't or wouldn't engage at that level. Einstein didn't spend his time arguing with people who couldn't grasp relativity theory. He surrounded himself with other physicists who could match his intellectual intensity. Marcus Aurelius didn't try to make every Roman citizen a philosopher. He wrote his Meditations as private reflections, never intending them for publication. Nietzsche didn't seek popular approval. He wrote for what he called free spirits, the rare individuals capable of thinking beyond conventional boundaries. This is your first breakthrough. You are not responsible for society's intellectual limitations. You are only responsible for protecting and developing your own capacity for deep thought. But here's where it gets revolutionary. Once you stop seeking validation from those who cannot provide it, you discover something extraordinary. Your intelligence isn't a burden to be hidden. It's a compass that guides you toward the people, ideas, and opportunities that actually matter. Think of it this way. Every time someone rejects you for thinking deeply, they're doing you a favor. They're revealing that they lack the intellectual courage or capacity to engage with complex ideas. Why would you want to waste your precious mental energy on people who are fundamentally incompatible with how your mind works? This realization leads to the second radical shift. You must learn to see rejection as a filtering mechanism, not a judgment. When someone becomes uncomfortable with your depth, they're not rejecting you personally. They're revealing their own limitations. And limitations, as any good engineer knows, are simply constraints that help you design better solutions. But here's the crucial part. These intellectual rebels didn't just think differently. They learned to communicate strategically. They understood that truth must be transmitted carefully, like a delicate flame that can be extinguished by too much wind or too little oxygen. This brings us to the third radical shift. Master the art of intellectual discretion. Not because you're hiding your intelligence, but because you're deploying it more effectively. Learn to recognize which minds are ready for which ideas. Understand that some conversations require depth, while others require diplomacy. Develop the wisdom to know when to engage and when to withdraw. Socrates mastered this art through his method of questioning. Instead of declaring complex truths directly, he asked simple questions that led others to discover those truths themselves. He understood that people resist ideas imposed upon them, but embrace ideas they believe they've discovered independently. This is not manipulation. It's education. It's meeting people where they are and gently guiding them toward where they could be. It's recognizing that intelligence without wisdom is merely clever, while intelligence with wisdom becomes transformative. The final breakthrough comes when you realize that your supposed isolation isn't a punishment. It's a privilege. While others are trapped in cycles of superficial thinking and social conformity, you have been given something far more valuable: the ability to see reality clearly. This clarity comes with responsibility. You become a guardian of depth in a world drowning in shallowness. You become a keeper of complexity in a world addicted to oversimplification. You become a voice of truth in a world that profits from illusion. Here is the ultimate truth that will shatter everything you thought you knew about intelligence and society. The rejection you've experienced isn't evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that something is profoundly right with you in a world that has lost its way. You are not too intelligent for society. Society has become too shallow for intelligence itself. This isn't a comforting platitude meant to make you feel better about being misunderstood. This is a recognition of something far more significant. You represent an evolutionary leap in human consciousness that society isn't yet equipped to handle. Your mind operates according to principles that transcend the limitations that govern most human thinking, and this terrifies a world built on those very limitations. Think about what your intelligence actually represents. When you see through comfortable illusions, you're demonstrating humanity's potential to transcend self-deception. When you question sacred assumptions, you're showing what it means to value truth over tribal belonging. When you think in complex systems rather than simple cause and effect, You're modeling a form of consciousness that could solve humanity's most pressing problems. But here's the revelation that changes everything. This capacity for deep thought isn't just an individual trait. It's a preview of where human consciousness is headed. The ultimate truth is this: every great mind that has ever lived has faced exactly what you're facing now. They felt the same isolation, endured the same rejection, questioned their own sanity in the face of collective blindness. But they held on to their vision of what was possible, and in doing so, they pulled humanity forward. You are part of this lineage. You carry this flame. And one day, perhaps sooner than you think, the world will be ready for the light you've been protecting. Until then, think deeply, question boldly, refuse to settle for simple answers to complex questions, and remember, the very thing that makes you an outsider today will make you essential tomorrow. The future is thinking its way into existence through minds like yours, and that future is closer than you imagine.